We had a division that, it was a great car count if we were in Florida, or somewhere else in the country, but by New England standards, the car count wasn't great and seemed to be diminishing, and we had to make a change.
Late models back then were G-metric. You could run a built motor and probably a big springs, 9-inch Ford rears.
A metric chassis that it was a stock frame that you had to start with. That era was going to come to an end. I mean, pretty soon you're going to have to switch over to a purpose-built frame, once those things dried up.
When Phil drove for me, we built the first G-metric car that they had down there.
And a lot of people, they were complaining about the cost of racing, and plus the G chassis not being, going to slowly disappear because guys were starting to hoard those because they weren't available anymore.
People said, look, we spend as much money on our motors as an SK motor. We spend as much money on our chassis as an SK. The only thing that might be a little less money is that the tires are a little less, but we burn them up with the same frequency. So I heard that. I got it. So I said, where do we go? And along came Tom Curley, and I started to get knowledgeable about how he was making late models successful at Thunder Road and on the ACT Tour. And it really was this spec motor and very tight roll otherwise.
Well, the ACT car is more like a modified.
The ACT cars are so easy to drive. It's a modified with a body on it.
You take a good look at those cars. They're coilovers. They have Panhard bars. I mean, they're set up just like an SK, just on a smaller tire with a big body.
We thought that Tom Curley had a great program going up there. He had a motor that was $6,500 and not $18,000, and a chassis that was really a race car chassis, not something that you're trying to make a passenger car chassis do something it was never meant to do.
Basically, you're making something that was designed to be a family car, grocery getter chassis. You're trying to make it into a race car.
The chassis under a G car is made to drive down the highway. The ACT car is made specifically for racing. Everything's low, left, light. You just slap on a nice body and you put your numbers in, your springs, and you go racing. There's no comparison, really.
The ACT 12 cars, they run basically a tube chassis, and they run a Howe front clip and coilover shocks and big sway bars and crate motors.
The cars are a little more delicate.
They had to keep up their momentum through the corners, whereas, with the G-body cars, we could muscle them around a little bit and still have that horsepower if we, got into a little bit of a trouble with the car and could drive out of it.
The late models we ran were kind of beefy. They could run in a pack more and bounce off each other a little bit, and it was a little more forgiving. And the other cars aren't as forgiving. When they take a hit, they break.
We thought it would be cheaper overall for the guys to race. And for most guys, it would be. The guys that were paying to have their motors built, it would have been cheaper.
There are a lot of people that hated it because as much as there were, guys like Matt Kobluk that, went to the best engine builder and stroke check, there were also those Mark St. Hilaire's and Phil Rondos that assembled their stuff themselves and, and built a motor for far less than the $20,000 that was the going rate for the SKs.
Mark says, I build my own motors and I don't spend $6,200 on a motor.
As inexpensive as that spec motor seems to you, Terry, it's still 3 times what I spend on my motor. So it was a very difficult decision.
There was a lot of hesitation.
You could do some things to the G cars to keep up.
Plus, you had the guys that were making their G chassis cars really go fast.
I mean, people like Alan Coates had huge motors that would keep up really well.
I've stuck by my engine builder for quite a few years. He stepped up to the plate and he built me an engine, and that thing is really stout.
So we tried to engineer the rule so that the two motors were about the same, so people didn't have to throw their stuff out right away. But it was one of those things where I really tried to not dwell on the status quo, but say, what's the future? And looking at it nationally, the future was spec motors, crate motors, whatever you want to call them. And I felt we had to do it.
I think we really took notice of ACT cars when Larry Goss got one.
Larry Goss was one guy who bought into it early.
Another car we've been keeping an eye on is number 6 of Larry Goss. As we mentioned before, that's one of those sealed motors with a tube frame, so we'll be keeping a very close eye on how that performs.
So when Larry started ripping up the track with a ACT car, we knew eventually we were going to get one, but Our funds weren't there.
So Larry had the only act car there for a couple seasons.
Yeah, until the Botticello showed up.
Side by side for the lead, down into the corner with Botticello inching out front. Perry in second, St. Hilaire in third. Dwayne Knoll to fourth. Here comes Paul Hurd, though, to the outside in car number 32.
And this Botticello shows up with that red 03. Remember that ugly car?
I do, yeah, putting on a show. He was really fast. The red 03.
With that red 03 at car.
Primered up 03 and just kicked their ass. I mean, he drove around them like they were stopped.
The writing was on the wall when I saw Dennis, and those guys are pretty smart. You know, once they got it figured out, those cars just rolled the corner way better.
Between himself and Bruce Thomas into 35, another car length back to Ed Field. Dowden rides fourth, Botticello fifth.
He showed up, and that was a good car owner, a good driver at the time. He was getting up there in age, but he could still wheel a race car pretty well.
These guys were all saying that they didn't like the motor, they didn't like the chassis, and Botticello came down and basically kicked their butts.
5 laps into this green flag run, he's opened up 5 car lengths between himself and Mark St. Hilaire. Leads off of turn 4 for the final time. Checker flag in the air for Dennis Botticello.
Comes up and he whips him again.
And never looked happy doing it. I'd walk by him in the pits and be like, dude, you're cleaning house and you're just not even smiling.
So that kind of made me say, I want one of them cars. Like, yeah, you know, that was the first thing. I want one of them. And then everybody kind of went to him.
I think that might have been when guys started to say, hey, maybe there is really something to this car.
If you don't make the spec motor the faster alternative, people are not going to, you know, it's a herd mentality. They're not going to go there until it's proven that that's the only way you're going to win races. So it was Botticello that came down, and I enjoyed seeing that car with a guy that didn't have a whole ton of laps at the place, you know, just kind of school everybody.
I raced against the Botticello car when he came there. He was like you said, there's like no other. The thing went through the corners, and that's when I still had my late model, and the thing was pretty good. You know, I was still ripping off some good laps.
Been a long time between visits in Victory Lane. What was the difference tonight? The 03 wasn't here.
So more and more came, and then we're finishing second. We'd win a couple races, and then we wouldn't win. And then I was like, you know, that time's come. I guess we got to park this thing and, you know, call it a day, which it killed me to do because that car just dominated. It was old, but it worked, you know, and it made me get rid of a good car that I loved and, you know, made me who I am.
I think if you threw some of these guys that are winning now in that car into a G car, they'd have no idea what they were doing.
It's funny because a friend of mine who was, loved the old days, and he went to a race at Waterford. We got him in the infield and all that kind of thing, but he commented on how he thought it was so particular that the people are so picky about the way setups were now, whereas in the old days, people would have driven the car with the imperfections or things. There's a whole different setup to the way things are now. If the newer cars are a little bit off, they're not going anywhere. Whereas in the old days, the driver would compensate because things weren't as particular.
Wozniak has the inside line and the run on Botticello. Side by side, they roar down the backstretch with Timmy Jordan right on the back bumper of both vehicles. The 3 cars tacked together as they come off turn number 4. Wozniak in the middle, 3 wide. They'll scream to the stripe. It is the 47 of Timmy Jordan takes the win. He's come all the way from the 3rd position to 0-3.
I always thought we could win. That's why we moved up. And we took 2005 off to regroup, build a shop, because Jordan Racing doesn't do it the wrong way. So we weren't going to race a late model out of the driveway. So we took a year off. We said we needed an AT car.
And I didn't really know who Timmy was. You know, when Timmy came on the scene, he was a guy that was related to Tom Fox.
And win number 2 for the nephew of Tommy Fox.
Well, a lot of people thought that he was in over his head. And then he goes and he just had a great car.
Also working on the outside now is the battle for the lead. Timmy Jordan with the black 47 inches his way out in front of Wozniak on turn number 4. New leader, it's the 47 of Jordan.
So Jordan on the outside, that's been his trademark in 2006.
Timmy won with the ACT chassis first and did a good job with that, and then Bruce took that up a notch for quite a few years.
Bruce Thomas Jr., I don't know as he and I really got to know each other that well. I mean, I know the Thomas family very well, but Bruce and I never really bonded.
I really don't know him all that well.
Bruce has always been to himself. I think a word I can say for him is chill. He's really, he's a relaxed person. He doesn't really get too uptight, but when he gets crossed, there's no turning back.
Bruce can do no wrong in any of our eyes. It's kind of like I was listening to a podcast, the Junior podcast, and every old time guy that worked with Dale Sr., they ask him, was it ever a time when you'd be like, oh, maybe you shouldn't have done that, Dale? And they always say no, like they stuck behind him. That's what Bruce is to us. Like, it didn't matter what happened. That's our dude.
Can Ed Reed Jr. hang on?
The final 2 laps as they charge across the stripe. It is Ed Reed looking to hold off Bruce Thomas. Thomas will make a move to the inside as they go down into turn number 3. He gets the right front on. Reed slides up the track. Thomas moves underneath. Macrino slides underneath. White flag in the air. Thomas with the lead.
Serious wheelman, world of knowledge, serious chassis guy, the numbers stuff.
He taught me a lot. He really showed me a lot of the basic stuff to be able to get the car competitive and be able to run up front.
A lot of respect for that. That guy is Mr. Late Model. He knows them cars like I know legend cars.
It was weird because when I went to high school with Bruce, it would be like I'd like kick him in the ass. Like, how come you're not into racing? He had nothing really to do with it as we went to school. But once he got out and he got in a mini stock, when he's determined, he makes it happen.
Bruce is probably one of the most dedicated guys to his car. I don't think anybody works on his car harder than Bruce Thomas Jr.
They put a lot of preparation into their car, which, as a driver and doing that myself, I kind of pick up on that. And they got a pretty good program.
Yo! Yeah, exactly. You thought I was good.
You're rolling.
Yeah, I got too much stagger.
As a family, we would bench race just like every other racing family. We'd work on the car for a while, start talking crap.
Yeah, certain sections.
I seen a bunch of that stuff. I do have to.
Hook me up, man. What the?
Right. What are you doing?
My family and I can't do anything without, make it turn into a complete competitive thing amongst us. It doesn't matter what we do.
Bruce is really driven. He's pretty sneaky when it comes to chassis stuff. He's always working on that car.
He'd be reading books. He'd figure stuff out on his own.
And it's always impressed me that he's just like he's like a MacGyver with auto racing.
He's one of the better act style drivers over there.
As a driver, Bruce is unreal. Like, if the car's going to give you, say, a 15.2 or a 15.3, he's going to get a 15.1 out of it in qualifying. He's unreal. He gets everything out of the race car and then more every single time on the track. We looked at it as a beneficial for our team to be in a crate division, and we just couldn't wait to get that car.
They go into turn number 3. The 35 rockets its way off turn number 4, down to the checkered flag. Bruce Thomas with the win.
Here he is! Bring it on, Bruce Thomas Jr.
One of the best things about Bruce is he will try any crazy setup in the car if he thinks it makes sense. No matter how off the wall it is, or sounds, or seems, he didn't care. He was willing to try it.
We never went back to the racetrack once, ever, in a late model with the same thing we had the week before. The dude was just always trying stuff to get better.
There was a small window where he was going head-to-head quite a bit with Timmy Jordan, and they had some, I don't know if it was bad blood or what, but they got into it a few times.
Those guys, there's no love lost there.
Those guys did put on some epic battles.
Some of the most epic battles I've ever seen.
They battled hard. They both had the best of the best.
They both had stout equipment. It was anybody's race at any given point.
fans love it. Some of the drivers may not love it.
Yeah, I mean, when the people genuinely don't like each other, that makes it that much, gets it a bit more weight, doesn't it?
There was a little animosity. They weren't on each other's Christmas cards list.
I don't think we'd go out to dinner together. I don't think we really liked each other personally, if I had to guess, without sugarcoating it.
There wasn't really much of a rivalry, like in our shop. We never talked about Timmy. We just wanted to go out there and win as many races as we could, and we really didn't care who we were racing against.
Rivalry with any other drivers, definitely a no, because we go out there every week to race everybody the same.
The two had completely different driving styles. Timmy was smooth, finesse. I feel like his car had to be perfect for him to beat us.
The Bruce and Timmy rivalry was awesome. You knew there was going to be a great show that night between those two guys. Definitely by halfway through the race, everybody was up at the fence waiting. It wasn't a matter of if it was going to happen, it was a matter of when, because they were clearly the class of the field, and they always ended up 1 and 2 at some point during the race.
If the fans thought it was cool, it's cool, but we never thought there was much there.
So he convinced me to come up to look at it right before the season started. When I got up there, it already had my name on the car. So I guess I figured I might as well drive for him, seeing as how he already lettered it up for me.